Hello, everyone. This will be a Sigma Stream episode. This is the Sigma Stream of the Granite Mountain Movie Club. This is a special legal review edition. We've got the what should I call you? J Respectful Clark.
That's my Twitter name. You can call me Matthias.
Okay.
We've
got Matthias, the very graced former Attorney General.
Assistant Attorney General.
Assistant Attorney General, yeah. I was hoping you'd get appointed to the Pam Bondi job, but you know.
Well, it's too late for her job. You never know what other possibilities are out there. But you know, Pam, if you're listening, the Civil Rights Division could use a guy like me.
Yeah, I don't know how this works exactly. How do people? So administration jobs, are they all just sort of like are they all know a guy jobs? You got to know a guy or?
Well, some of them are, some of them are. Obviously, it really, really helps to know a guy. I mean, even for low level stuff, even if you just want to work, which I wouldn't even necessarily say this is low level, a job in a regional U.S. attorney's office is a very good job and very interesting and pays pretty well. But even for those, you need good references and things like that. So to actually work in central justice is you need to be connected, have elite credentials. You kind of need a little bit of everything. So,
yeah.
But I mean, hopefully they'll be firing a bunch of people and they'll need more warm bodies. So,
Yeah, I hope so. And that's why you're here, because we've got Trump was sworn in, 4 days ago, I think, right? Monday. Today's Friday. So 4 or 5 days ago. And he's going sicko mode with the executive orders.
He's going farther than any of us could have reasonably hoped for.
Yeah,
maybe we could have dreamed of it, but we couldn't have hoped for it.
Yeah, he's making the dreams become reality. What is the Sam Hyde? Think it, dream it, do it. Yeah. He's on the doing it phase, and it's more than I think people thought. How does this compare to normal executive orders? So there's a Wikipedia page up. There's a list of executive orders in the second presidency of Donald Trump. With these Wikipedia nerds, they tend to be pretty up to date. They've got 32. Is there more than 32?
Oh, I think there's more than 32. Yeah.
What do they miss? Oh, I guess they're missing a bunch. How many has he done? And like, how does this compare to normal presidents? I know every president comes in and does a bunch, but these seem to have bigger scope and maybe just in terms of volume also more.
There's always, definitely the trend, and it didn't start with Trump or Biden. I mean, the trend has been ongoing for a long time for the executive branch to do more and more through its own initiative rather than going through Congress. And some of that is, there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one is that the government has become so complicated, with so much involved in regulations, that sort of thing, that, Congress, a lot of times they just throw up their hands and they just give the executive branch, regulatory authority to do a lot of things that either Congress doesn't want to be caught doing, like they want them done, but they don't want their fingerprints on it. Or, it's just a matter of, the whole point of empower, if you were to defend it from a practical standpoint, you would say that, regulations are sort of inherently too detailed to be the subject of legislation, right? Like Congress has to legislate so many things in a year, and they're not going to get into, how wide the bolts have to be on, a defense, for a defense contract or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that would be the sort of practical defense of it. But realistically, I mean, at this point, they've used that to just kind of abdicate legislation to the executive branch. So that's one part of it. And I think the other part, which is somewhat more recent, is as the parties have become more ideologically aligned rather than, regionally or just, pragmatically, but where ideology has actually taken over the parties for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
you've got more instances where the something needs to be done, or somebody perceives that something needs to be done, and you have gridlock, and so the executive just says, well, fine, I'll just do it on my own, which everybody knows is not as permanent as legislation. It's fleeting, but at the same time, you do have to. I mean, the executive does have to act. I mean, he is empowered to act for the United States, and he needs to be able to do things. I mean, to take an example, I know we'll get into it, but these things like allowing the Coast Guard to interdict illegal immigration. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, right? I mean, they're guarding the coast. Shouldn't we just let them guard the coast? But this is the kind of thing that you know maybe legislation doesn't specify that as one of the Coast Guard's duties, and that kind of falls into these in between the lines rules that where the president has to kind of fill in the blanks.
Mhm.
So it's definitely becoming more. I think the other thing too is, like, as the Democratic Party. I mean, they would say that, the Republican Party is becoming more extreme and they're becoming dictatorial. Obviously, we see it the other way. I mean, Biden. To take a couple clear examples, like DACA. The basically, like, more or less granting green cards to illegals, just because they were young when they came over.
Yeah.
Like, that was the way they framed that was clearly illegal. The way they framed it was, well, this is just prosecutorial discretion. You know, the president, doesn't have, there's no way everyone who breaks the law is going to, um, be held to account for it. So this is just the president deciding, here's this category of people that aren't really worth going after. It's like, no, that's not actually what's going on here. You're actually handing them, you're facilitating their illegal presence in the United States. It's totally different.
And
But
the doc is the same as Dreamers, right? And
yeah, yeah.
they weren't made citizens. They were just Obama just said we're just going to ignore you.
No, I mean, it was more than that. He gave them papers to, like, facilitate everything they'd want to do in the U.S. Basically, I mean,
So
so,
yeah,
like,
no limitations on education or employment,
or,
basically.
or whatever it might
Yeah,
be. It was as good as a green card, or a visa. As far,
yeah,
and the president doesn't have the authority to just grant people legal right to be here. Um, there's those things are parceled out by legislation, but he did it. And appallingly, the Roberts Court, when the Trump administration tried to get rid of it, they came back and said, well, you know, you haven't proven that you had, like, a non-discriminatory, you didn't prove you had a valid reason for undoing this. So, like, Obama didn't need a valid reason for doing it, but if it's a classic ratchet effect sort of thing where, Obama can just do things, but Trump, to undo them, has to, like, explain himself. He can't just undo something because he feels like it was an overstretch of authority or something.
yeah.
I don't actually. I think that case would actually turn out much differently now. Now that a couple more spots have been filled on the court, but um, although Barrett's a wild card when it comes to immigration stuff. But anyway, so that was an example. Another example is, like, Biden throwing open the border. I mean, again, they would say, well, it's prosecutorial discretion. Like, the amount of enforcement is, where you decide to focus your efforts on enforcement. I mean, that's inherent, and no, every president's going to have some discretion with that. I mean, realistically, it was a new policy that said you're allowed to come to the United States. I mean, or like the app that they gave them to
Hmm.
to just automatically waltz into the across the border, and not face a hearing for years. That was absurd. I mean, that was a clear abuse of. I mean, it was to call it prosecutorial discretion is dignifying it with something it doesn't deserve. I mean, it was just a clear lawless action. And so, because the Democrats have continued to do that kind of thing, um, we've it's inherent that you're going to have to issue some executive orders to undo something that was done entirely from the executive office.
So I'm looking at a chart here. This is I don't know who put this out, but it's first day executive orders by recent presidents. Not that many. So Clinton only had one in his first term, and
Really,
then
that's actually
it
very
says
surprising to me.
Yeah, it says Obama had two in 2009, and maybe they're not. I don't know if they're counting second term, first day, which I don't know if that matters. And then Trump only had one in 2017, and then
Mhm.
Biden had nine, and then Trump on Monday had 26.
Yeah.
So and then before that, before Clinton, no one did any. I guess that wasn't it just wasn't as much part of the governing strategy. So of the 26, and then there's been some others in the subsequent days. But of these new ones this week, which ones are your favorite? Which ones do you find most interesting?
Well, the one I found most surprising, and I think this is probably true of most people, is the order that rescinded all affirmative action in the federal government, which was a LBJ order, and I did not expect that, and I think it's the I think we still don't know exactly what kind of consequences that's going to have. Can we pause for a second? The dog is barking. I'm going to tell her to knock it
Yeah,
off.
I don't hear it. By the way, I don't hear the dog.
I know, but it's bugging me. I think she just heard me talking and thought there was an intruder or something.
Yeah, well, there is an intruder. That's what podcasting is. Intruding. You're entering people's mind space. It's the most invasive and intrusive thing that can happen.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's spirit. I haven't. Aren't there tweets about this? Maybe like I don't like him, but I'll give credit where it's due. Maybe Lindy Man has one. It's like something
somebody said
like,
something. If you tweet, you like rape somebody's mind because you implant the seed and the thought in their brain or
yeah,
something like that.
or something like if you let like oh you just walk around your city with headphones on, letting another man enter your mind, like that's gay, bro. Something
I
like that.
know there's one that talks about planting the seed.
Yeah. uh, well, so real quick though, you're talking about the LBJ thing, the affirmative action in hiring, the an executive order. So the LBJ thing, that was just he was just reversing LBJ's EO, right? Like you can just
Yeah.
that doesn't require like that one's going to be safe. Like that, a court can't come back later and say no, right? Or can
Uh,
they?
well, you would think not, but that's kind of what happened with DACA. I mean, DACA was just an order by Obama, and then people are like, "No, this vested a right in me that you can't take away." And I mean, shocking. Now, I will say it wasn't done on a constitutional basis. It was when the Trump administration tried to undo DACA, it was rejected. I think under the Administrative Procedures Act. So basically, it was like you didn't dot your I's and cross your T's with removing this, but really it was a substantive objection because they were saying, you didn't prove that you had justification for doing it under the APA, and so you would think that um, he could just if somebody if it was only done by executive power in the first place, then you could undo it by executive power, but it's possible somebody's going to raise some kind of, I don't know, APA objection or something. I really don't know.
Hmm.
I mean, these people can kind of twist anything around. Again, I would say that under the current Supreme Court, common sense Supreme Court would say, this was done according to the executive power, so it can be undone according to the executive power. But you never know what they might raise up. But
Yeah.
that's more just a political question than a legal one, really. But no, I mean, yeah, he has the power to undo that. I think you know, he's going to, he's running when in enforcing that one, he's running against just an immense amount of cultural momentum and institutional momentum that is, you have these offices. I mean, and I would say actually shutting down the DEI offices was incredible.
Hmm.
I mean, and actually totally necessary if he wants to make this actually work, because you have all this institutional apparatus that is its only job is to do DEI stuff, and it's not just the people who are like director of DEI. you know
Yeah.
it's a lot of HR people, and and it's going to be a lot of people who have actual real jobs, even like high level administrators or whatever, who are just the product of 50 years of thinking that this is how business is done. And so he's up against all of that, and so it's not just a matter of signing the document, but to even try to do all that is amazing. And obviously it's going to make a difference. It has to make a difference. I mean, even something like the Supreme Court decision that came out, I think, can't remember if it was early last year or late the year before, the one about affirmative action in college admissions. Even that one, that seemed to me to be like correct legally. Obviously, like don't discriminate based on race means don't discriminate based on race. But at the same time, I thought it was going to be pretty unenforceable because I mean, college admissions are inherently subjective,
Mm-hmm.
So it was always going to be easy for them to, to basically get around it, being like, no, we're not giving them preference because they're black. We're giving them preference because they wrote a fantastic essay about the racial challenges they overcame. Um,
Well, that's a beat, but also, Asian people do have worse personalities, right?
oh yeah, but that was one of the claims, wasn't it?
That's what Harvard,
They've
like
got, they've
Harvard
got worse.
literally said. They're like, we find they just don't do as well on
They're just
personality
boring.
measures.
They
Yeah,
just don't have a good vibe. We just don't like we sat across the bar from them and didn't like their vibe. No,
yeah.
no, and so even that made a difference at places that like tried like like the most schools just totally ignored it, like they did. I mean, Michigan, for example, already has a law that specifies they can't do it. California has a law
Even
that says they
even
can't do
California. Yeah,
it. Yeah, but in spite of all, so most schools ignored it, but a couple schools didn't, like a few, and they're important ones too. I mean, what is the impact of MIT basically cutting its affirmative action in half? It could be pretty big. Some kids getting in a few hundred kids getting in MIT that wouldn't otherwise. That's a pretty big deal. The
yeah. If
dog
you
is
ever
whining
see,
again. I'm going to go stop her. I think she wants to get let out. Hold on.
oh, no problem.
All right.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say real quick. If you ever see the Caltech admissions by race versus every other like elite technical university,
Mm-hmm.
I guess Caltech for whatever reason had a tradition or policy of truly being race blind, and
Yeah.
so their admissions are like entirely Asian and white, and then all of their peers, have.
They used to be though.
Uh,
Like, didn't they kind of after the Great Awakening kind of loosen up a bit on that?
yeah, they probably
Caltech, I
did. They
mean?
probably backed off. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, you know what? It was about women. I don't think they changed the racial composition too much, but they started letting in way more women.
Hmm.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know.
The
So I mean, the point I was kind of getting at is like, so even this in this area where there's not a lot of objective criteria, and it's easy to kind of get around it. Even there, some people at least followed the spirit of the law, and it made a difference. With what Trump is doing, they actually have people in charge. There's nobody at Harvard that doesn't want to do affirmative action, right? So
mhm.
so naturally, like if they're the ones in charge of making sure that no affirmative action is happening, that's not, like you'd have to appoint like a special master or something to actually make a change there. Some or some judges got an order to monitoring them, and but in the case of the federal government, theoretically at the top, it's Trump's people who are directing it. And so it should have a much more powerful effect, even though they will face resistance. they have the power to go against that. And I think one thing that's going to be huge for all of these carrying out all of these executive orders is the fact that, you know, have you ever heard of a Supreme Court case called Morrison and Olson? Morrison versus Olson.
No, I don't know anything about it.
So Morrison versus Olson was this Supreme Court case back in the 1980s, and it was about the independent counsel statute. And I don't you're not I don't know if you're old enough to remember the Clinton years, but like the independent counsel, that was Ken Starr and the way they, Bill
Oh
Clinton's
yeah,
cases.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The idea of the independent counsel, it was done in reaction to Richard Nixon, and he had fired a couple of attorneys general for investigating Watergate, and they said, well, this is, we need somebody who can't be fired by the president or the attorney general, who can investigate the executive branch and not be subject to executive supervision or firing. And there was a Supreme Court case on it, Morrison versus Olson, back in the 80s, and it was an 8-1 decision. It was the constitutionality of that of the independent counsel statute was challenged because they said, the executive power is vested in the president. If you have somebody who's an executive officer, which an independent counsel is, and they can't be fired by the president, then then you now have two executives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we no longer have a unitary executive. And Scalia was the only dissent in that case, but his dissent was so irrefutable in its reasoning that pretty much anybody who came up through the Federalist Society now accepts that case was wrongly decided. And it's part of the reason that the independent counsel statute wasn't renewed. I mean, the other part of it is that the Clinton thing had kind of soured people on it. But I think most people in the conservative legal academy now are like, yes, Scalia was right. You can't have an executive officer that the president can't fire unless it's provided for in the Constitution. So there's all these things. Trump. Before either right before the election or right after, there was this debate about whether Trump could fire Jerome Powell, the Fed chief.
Yeah.
And look, like is the Fed part of the government or not? Because if it is, then the president can fire him. I mean, it's not. You can't create an executive office that the president can't terminate somebody from. And the same thing with the FBI director. Like, oh, the FBI director is appointed for a period of 10 years. It's, the president, he's still under the president. And so
Yeah.
I think what you're going to see is you're going to see people who, on all of these orders, are going to set themselves in total opposition to Trump, and they're going to get fired, and then they're going to challenge that firing, saying, no, I have union protections or some kind of statutory provision that promises I can't be fired for political reasons or whatever. And I think that if it goes to Supreme Court, I think they're going to reverse explicitly Morrison versus Olson and say, no, the president has to be able to fire people if they're not carrying out what he's saying.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I mean, I think that sort of highlights. Yeah, I think it's just going to be at least these first 2 years, possibly the full term. It's going to be. I don't know. Do you think there's going to be? I was talking to someone earlier today and saying kind of how there's only a handful of presidents who, and maybe this is kind of like the Yarvin thing about, there's presidents and then there's executives, and there's executives who actually sort of changed the composition of the country. They actually make the country into a different place than it was before they were in office. So you got FDR, you got Lincoln. I don't know who the other ones are on his list, but is Trump, this sort of aggressive start? Is he sort of setting himself up to be like an actual on that level? Like an actual reform, or whatever. I don't know what you call these people, but like a new epoch,
Transformative president, let's say.
Transformative, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think he's a transformative figure. He's definitely realigned the parties in a big way. And I think that's a pretty big change. Whether it endures, I think, has a lot to do with whether he succeeds at this stuff. Because if he actually is able to kind of turn the tide on immigration and you know, kind of create a new public consensus in which the government actually enforces immigration law, that's going to have incredibly far-reaching effects and will, not only on the country, but on, the politics of the country, because it's going to affect how the parties align. And, that's the reason the Democrats have been doing the, lack of immigration enforcement, is just to get more voters. And so if Trump is able to stop or even reverse that, aside from whatever other economic or quality of life effects it has, it's going to have a huge effect on the coalitions. I mean, because that's, Trump. The funny thing is that Trump, he's realigned on a few things. Obviously, he's made immigration more of an issue than it had ever been. But also he's much more moderate fiscally than um, than like, say, Paul Ryan or Mitt Romney or
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan or whatever. And you know, I see that as, regardless of whether Trump himself, holds those positions. I mean, a lot of people have said he's like a Clintonite Democrat, right? But like Trump, the popularity that he has, the fact that Republicans have accepted his like greater fiscal liberalism, is partly in response to immigration. It's like, now that the country has become more liberal because of immigration, you kind of have to move that direction. And because the country is poorer because of immigration, you have to move that direction because there's more people who want help from the government. And so I think Trump, his kind of fiscal liberalism is a concession to that reality.
Mm-hmm. Regarding the so yeah, demographic transformation would be a huge lasting legacy. Which executive orders? I know there's one regarding birthright citizenship, which this one feels to me, it's sort of like it's like Roe v. Wade, like 5 years ago. If you told me that Roe v. Wade would be overturned, it didn't even seem like sort of on the political menu. This one, it seems similar to me, like, oh, is and then this is what Trump, I think, is so good at, is it's like making things that didn't even seem, that sort of seemed like settled, or
Yeah,
making them on the table again. And that's like, I guess that's all art of the deal, negotiation stuff. But
yeah.
so I know there's an executive order about birthright citizenship. Of course, this one's going to be contested big time. What are the implications of this, or this executive order?
Okay, pause one more time. The stupid dog. She's not normally like this. I think she's feeling chipply because I'm talking to someone else. Hold
This is just how it is in amateur podcasting.
on.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we were talking about the birthright citizenship order, and what's going to happen next.
Yeah, so I mean, now, like, currently there's a TRO because of a judge in Seattle. That's temporary restraining order. So to explain, a TRO is that's the order that you get at the very beginning of a case before they've even had a chance to litigate things. It's not as permanent as a it's not a permanent injunction, and it's not even as solid as a preliminary injunction where they've had a chance to really do serious briefing and decide, while we have a trial on this, are we going to hold this thing in place. A TRO is just a very temporary, like, it's an emergency, we got to stop this while we sort things out kind of order. And you know, I mean, there's a couple implications of this order that the judge issued. I mean, first of all, it was inevitable. I mean, I think you saw me mention in a chat yesterday that, like, there's going to be a TRO soon. Like, that takes no time at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it
So
was
like in
inevitable.
this, for this like Seattle judge, like, did someone even need to, I know, like, when something has to go through the court system, like someone actually has to bring a case, but did anyone
Right?
even have to, this is
Yes, they
just
did.
like, okay.
Yeah, somebody brought a case. Yeah,
Okay.
so they filed a lawsuit, and they asked, with the lawsuit, they asked for a temporary restraining order, which, that usually, I think, depends on, the court, but, usually you got to respond to that within like 24 hours, or even less sometimes if the court specifies. And so, obviously you're not going to file it's not going to be like the highest level of briefing because you have to respond really quickly. But honestly, most people know what the issues are, so you can kind of give a quick and dirty analysis and have an argument about it in court and all that. And I think it was inevitable they were going to issue the TRO, especially because it is kind of, it is unprecedented. I mean, not to say that the idea of that birthright citizenship isn't required by the Constitution. That is not a new idea. It's been argued about for a long time, but certainly no president has ever issued an order like this, right? And so I think I don't necessarily think it was utterly inappropriate to issue a TRO in the specific case. Now, whether there's a couple things that were hinky about it. One is the judge made some really embarrassing comments at the, and libs were like, of course, rejoicing over it. They're like, oh yeah, he totally pwned those
Yeah.
Trump lawyers. But I mean, it was really, I'm sorry. Like, I've clerked for the federal courts. Like, a judge should not be making pronouncements on the merits of the case other than to say, with a TRO, you don't even have to say that you think that the person who made the motion, you don't even have to say you think they're going to win. You just have to say, look, this is important. We got to hold things in place. This implicates serious issues that could be damaged if we don't issue this order while we sort it out. So, he could have just signed the TRO. Instead, he was like, how could anyone think this? I can't believe a member of the bar would come before me and say that this order is constitutional. It's like, well, then you've just judged the case. I mean, you've already said that there's under no circumstances are you going to even listen to the arguments, which is crazy because this isn't, I mean, unlike some people on the right, I don't think it's crazy to interpret. I mean, I don't think the libs have no legs to stand on here. I mean, like there's a lot of, there's not necessarily the Constitution's not a smoking gun that says that, you have to allow birthright citizenship, but certainly it's been the custom. I mean, if you think about like, if your parents, like how have we treated people even before the most recent waves of immigration? If they came here and had a kid, they've been treated as a U.S. citizen by custom,
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. And so, I do think Trump is ultimately going to lose. I'm not saying he should lose. I don't think the Constitution actually does require birthright citizenship, but I also think that in interpreting the Constitution, the courts are going to look at custom and probably conclude like, how, they're going to have to, if they're not going to just find a right to birthright citizenship in the Constitution, they're still going to have to explain how you reconcile this new executive order with, the longstanding custom of, just
Allowing
assuming
it.
that if people are born in the U.S. that they're a citizen, right? And of course, I mean, obviously, the people who passed the 14th Amendment did not envision Chinese people flying in for the last month of their pregnancy and then having a baby just so they could
Yeah.
get another passport. Like, obviously, that's true, but at the same time, that cuts both ways. It means you can't necessarily assume that they didn't kind of think, you can't, because they didn't envision that, they also didn't put in a provision that says, no, obviously, if you're just some foreigner dropping in to get a passport, we're not going to allow that. It's the kind of thing that really ought to happen by legislation. But, the other thing I was going to say that was hinky about the TRO order is just that, this typical thing where one federal judge can just do this in the whole country. Sorry.
No problem.
Where one federal judge can just do this for the whole country. And, I mean, obviously the order applies in their case. As a practical matter, it's going to apply to any of the states that are in that case. So like in this case, I think it was the attorneys general of like Oregon, Washington, maybe a couple other liberal states or something.
In the judge community, the legal community, like these guys are all just sort of like, are they all just racing to be the first like libtard judge to get their thing in, to find an opportunity?
I mean, it's not really up to them. I mean,
yeah, they need a case, right? But they're all just like
case.
praying that they don't pray, but if they did pray, or they do pray to like, I don't know, Satan or something.
Well, look, there's a reason they filed the lawsuit in Seattle and not
Yeah.
say Yakima, Washington.
Yeah.
Well, right? I mean, there's a reason they file these cases. The Prop 8 lawsuit was filed, there's a reason it was filed in San Francisco and not Fresno. You know,
Yeah.
right? Like they do these things because they know these are the judges that are on this court. I do think personally, now theoretically, this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory, but theoretically, judge draws are random. Okay, it's like whose
Yeah.
turn is it to get assigned a new case? You know, and it's just that spins around. I think, and I know I'm not the only lawyer with experience in the federal courts who thinks this, and I won't go beyond that. But the Prop 8 case was adjudicated by a gay judge. You know,
Oh
and
yeah.
look, there's no law against being a gay judge. But at the
Not
same
yet.
time, is that a
That's
coincidence?
that's an
That's
executive order
probably
tomorrow.
2026. Okay. I
Gay
mean,
judges.
I mean, is it a coincidence? Do you want me to believe it's a coincidence that like the Prop 8 case happened to go to a gay judge? It stretches credulity to me. I think they do. I think within the courts they sometimes have the ability to steer it to a certain judge. That being said, there probably isn't a judge. There probably isn't a federal district court judge in Seattle who wouldn't have issued this order. So in this case, that probably wasn't even necessary. In fact, this
Yeah.
guy was a Reagan appointee, but he's also, like most judges, are institutionalists ultimately. So unless they are very strongly ideologically right wing, which the Reagan era is totally different political era. I mean, there were still liberal Republicans back then, especially in places like Seattle.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point being, like, it's not. This was predetermined. That like, I think there was another, the quote unquote Muslim ban was enjoined by a judge in Hawaii. Well, why was that case brought in Hawaii? We all know. There's a
Yeah.
reason it was brought there and not Alabama.
I was thinking about the Muslim ban the other day. I remember the sort of the aesthetics of it being really annoying. Do you remember when all those lawyers would like go to the airport and they like all had like their like lawyer clothes on, but then they had like running shoes and they were like
Yeah.
running back and forth to like
Oh
just be
gosh.
annoyingly, like, I don't know, do whatever, like throw paper
Look
at
at me.
people. And
I'm a hero lawyer. All they
yeah,
needed was a cape. Yeah.
yeah, that was so annoying. And I felt like that was about to come back with some of these things.
I think there's honestly too much going on. I mean, that's another benefit of doing all these orders at once, is like they can't just focus their attention, like with the Muslim ban thing. And that's why I said the so-called Muslim ban, because it wasn't a Muslim ban, but
Yeah.
um, but with that thing, there weren't that many other like hugely notable liberal bugaboos that were really implicated by the earliest orders, so it was easy for them to like focus on that. With
Yeah.
this, I mean, they got it.
That's a good tactic of Trump. I mean, he's always been good about like the overwhelming thing, just overwhelm them with stuff to talk about, and then they can't build a case for any given one because the
Oh,
public
and libs
needs.
do this too. I mean, libs do it too. It's like, truly, libs do whack-a-mole. Just when you think they're losing a certain argument, then something else will pop up and they'll be like, learn about the new kind of marriage where, and it's just like, oh my gosh, do I have to make the argument against this too? I mean, do we really have to
Yeah,
point out how stupid all these things are? So yeah, I mean, it's effective. I mean, the danger is, of course, you don't focus your efforts anywhere. But I think, and I think that would have been a bigger problem in the first Trump term because he didn't have his people. I
yeah,
really do think he's got way more institutional heft now. There's more people that are part of the Trump movement. It's not a total shock that he won. So people were already trying to get on his side, like, before the election, because it's like, this guy might win. We better, I better align myself. And so he's, I think he's got more people who are, and we've been having these arguments for 8 years too. So like, somebody like J.D. Vance, who's like a very impressive guy. 8 years ago, he was not on Trump's side. Now he is,
yeah,
and he's
yeah.
aligned.
They got a lot of converts, and some of that, I think we can credit to the hard work of the anonymous Twitter poster who
Of course.
has been out there making good arguments, making good jokes for 8-10 years now.
Yeah.
But
Well,
that's really changed a lot of people. I have a lot of friends who have I've had multiple friends recently who sort of had their like coming out text, where they like, texted me and they're
Right.
like, "Look, I'm actually on the Trump train. Like a lot of my family's mad at me, but like in like 4 or 5, 6 years ago, they were libtards. Like
Yeah.
they were Obama people and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've definitely seen that too. And I mean, part of it too is like, you know, I had a tweet thread about this, but like the Biden people somehow, they luck into winning a presidential election. I mean,
Yeah, luck. That was luck. That was lucky that the twenty
it was
million
luck
votes.
and stealing.
Those
I
were
mean,
lucky. Yeah,
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 it's like with any crime, you have to be lucky to get away with the crime, right? And
yeah.
so, they stole the election, they got away with it, whatever. And then they're like, well, now this is a mandate to go ultimate anti-Trump. It's like, nah, that's not what it was. But so they
Hmm.
did. I mean, they're like, we're going to let in 7 gajillion immigrants, and we're going to just spend through the roof, and nobody voted for that. You know, so I do think part of it is people are like coming to their senses, like, wow, it actually doesn't make sense. Like, a lot of these things it doesn't make sense to just throw open the borders and not enforce the law. And a lot of these things, the last few years have been very clarifying, because a lot of what held back, say, Trumpism, right,
Hmm.
is just people not wanting to unsettle things, right? Like, oh gosh, this is stirring up racial hatred, or are you really going to deport the kid who came over here when he was 3? And it's this kind of the parade of horribles. And the argument for it was never racism is actually really fun, or
I
deporting.
have I have heard that argument,
Well, yeah, but I'm
but
saying
not
that
from
wasn't
Trump.
that
Not from
wasn't the
yeah,
Trumpist argument, right? And
yeah,
and 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 deporting kids who came over here when they were little is actually really fun. I mean, that was never the mainstream argument. It was, if you don't do this stuff, if you don't enforce the law, if you don't, like, if you let yourself be manipulated emotionally, you throw everything away. It destroys everything. I mean, that's the argument. Is like, you don't have the luxury of doing things just because they make you feel like a good person, you know.
yeah,
And I think that the Biden years proved it. The Biden years proved that that was right. It's like, oh no, actually stuff does turn to crap if you let yourself be guided by emotional manipulation from these bad faith actors.
yeah. So, okay, so we have the birthright citizen thing, and that one probably maybe won't stick, or probably won't stick. It sounds like, but
Yeah, I mean, but
he's reset the conversation on it at
right.
least.
It changes the conversation. It also creates uncertainty. So, like, there's going to be people who don't come because they don't know if it's going to be allowed
Yeah,
or not. Right. So, I mean, just on its own, while it's pending, it's probably going to have some marginal effect on people coming over, and it may create the momentum for, I guess this is part of the change in the conversation, but like, it creates the momentum for some kind of congressional vote. And
yeah,
I don't know how that's going to go. I mean, I suspect in the Senate you're going to see some senators turn and, oh, I can't vote to take away birthright citizenship. But
yeah,
a legislative fix would be the ideal, because then you could say, look, we've been doing it this way the whole time, but we don't have to do it that way, and we can instead say, from now on, we're going to put an end to this birth tourism thing.
yeah. Are there any other executive? So I know, the deportations are ramping up. That's not an executive order thing? That's just Trump saying, "Hey, DHS, you are now free to actually do your job."
Well, part of it. I mean, part of it is just them knowing that he has his back, but a lot of it is executive orders. Like,
So what? Yeah. So we have there's executive orders specifically for deportations.
yeah, well, I mean, so first of all, he has his people in charge now who are like, we're actually going to round these people up. But also, he's doing things like freeing up other agencies to help enforce this stuff. I mean, you would think that would be a no brainer. Like, if I get, this is a no brainer for most crimes, right? If I get pulled over for drunk driving, and then they run my license plate and they find that actually I also have a warrant for robbery, they're gonna
Mm-hmm.
they're going to book me on both. Like
Yeah.
there, you don't have, there's not like a separate robbery police and a separate DUI police, right? And yet, they operate this way so many times. And in fact, with regard to the states, that's the way the federal government has operated, is you guys aren't allowed to enforce immigration law. I mean, that's the way the Democrat administrations have operated. So Trump is going to free all that up and say, look, if you're in custody and we find out you're an illegal alien, you're gone, you know? And so that's actually a pretty huge deal. And that needed an order because it was the opposite under Biden.
Mm.
And then there's stuff like allowing the military to get involved, or ordering the military to get involved, which I think, again, part of the effect here is the actual apprehension of illegals, and part of it is people getting the message that they're not just going to let us in, and I might just not bother. Because that's what happened with Remain in Mexico. I mean, that was another order. He restored Remain in Mexico.
Yeah, I'm seeing like anecdotal and photographic instances of like, long lines to get back into Mexico. I don't know if that's, I don't if that's really happening in earnest quite yet, but it seems like it is. So,
well, I know that they actually I would say for the first couple days after, it's like Tuesday, Wednesday, they saw a fraction of the number of border interactions.
Oh yeah, like 1/10. Like they went from like 12,000 engagements per day to like 700.
Right. So that's great, but it makes sense. I mean, people respond to incentives, and that's what this has always been about. People are like, well, you're not going to be able to deport 30 million people or whatever the number is. I mean, it's probably closer to 50 or 60, but it's like, you don't have to. I mean, of course, you're never going to get everybody, but like, if people see like, oh no, they're going out, they're looking for people, I'm going to get caught, or there's a reasonable chance I might get caught, it's like, why bother? It's not worth it. I don't want to get, thrown into an immigration cell or whatever. It's just, so, I mean, that's why I think it's important to be seen doing this. It's not just, sometimes people think, like, sometimes it makes sense when you're enforcing something to kind of keep a low profile, maybe because the enforcement's not that popular or whatever. This stuff, I most of the time when you're enforcing the law, it's good to make a show of it, because then people are like, man, I don't want that to happen to me,
Yeah.
And they just won't engage in the activity. It's deterrence.
Yeah. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. What are some of the other good executive orders that are exciting? I have one in mind. I want to see if you get there.
You hit me with that. I'm not actually looking at the list, so I'll pull up a list, but you tell me what you have in mind.
I'll just run through a few, and then so we got putting America first in international environmental agreements. That sounds like a boring one, but it's probably just like pulling out of
the Paris Agreement or whatever.
Paris, okay.
Yeah.
Withdrawing from the WHO. Yeah, we knew that one was going to happen. Let's see. They're making Doge. I think that they for the government efficiency thing, they're just replacing the U.S. Digital Service with Doge. Like, so people were saying, oh, it's not going to be a real government thing, but it's not. It's not going to be cabinet level, but it is actually now going to be a real government office or whatever.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I don't know what the implications of that are for Elon, because is he's still, I assume, going to be an informal advisor, because for him to actually have a government job, raises all kinds of issues that him just being a private citizen doesn't. But
yeah. Defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth to the federal government. I don't know. That one's making male, female the official binary of the government, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it has implications pretty far down, because like the Biden administration, the DOJ, the Biden DOJ tried to. They basically said, we consider it unconstitutional for states to pass laws that that restrict like sex surgeries for minors, for example, or hormone treatments. I think that they were going to lose that if it had ever gone up to the Supreme Court or something. But now, of course, the government's going to reverse course on this, and they're going to say, well, we're not pushing for that. State, we don't want people to force kids, to get sex changes and things like that. So It's amazing what can happen when the government is just like, no, we don't actually want to harm children.
Yeah. We've got restoring names that honor American greatness. That's the Mount McKinley thing and the Gulf of America.
Yeah.
I thought he was going to sell the Gulf of America a little longer, but nope, it's Gulf of America now.
Yeah, the McKinley thing is interesting because in Alaska, um, the political establishment there is all unified behind the Denali thing. Um,
Um, I
even
have a
even the Republicans, because I think the state is maybe, I want to say, 40% Alaska Native and almost all the rest white, and so it um, you can win. Obviously, like, most of the natives vote Democrat, most of the whites vote Republican, but there's plenty of crossover, and I think the Republicans up there. There's a funny thing where, like, most of the prominent Republican politicians are married to Alaska Native ladies. Like
hmm,
the governor and Dan Sullivan, the U.S. senator, are both married, if I recall correctly, to Alaska Native ladies, and so I think they always kind of felt like this was kind of an easy sop to give to Alaska Native voters. To just, everybody says Denali, or it's like our special thing. We call it Denali. Those people in the lower 48 call it McKinley or whatever. But it's the federal government that names it. So
yeah. Gulf of America, I don't know, that one rolls off the tongue quite right, in my opinion. I I might have changed. I'm okay with changing it, but I might have called it Gulf of Texas, or
well, that's a good one.
something like, yeah, right, or something like, you know, Gulf of, I don't know, Gulf of New Orleans. I don't know, whatever. Like, I would have given it
Yeah.
maybe a regional name or something. Gulf of America, it's, I don't know, something about it doesn't flow quite right. But
Well, I'm gratified to hear you say that, because I got bullied in chat for saying that I wasn't wild about Gulf of America. But so don't let anyone hear that you said that. But yeah, no,
yeah,
I
I'd
mean,
be into a more obscure name. I don't know if there's a good regional reference down there too.
the comparison I would make is, I once, when I was a missionary, I taught some guys from Argentina, and they had one guy that was from Mendoza, which is a state in Argentina that's right on the Chilean border, and he was a little bit darker than the rest, so they all called him El Chileno, the Chilean. He
Yeah,
wasn't Chilean, but they called him the Chilean because he was, like, somewhat close to there. And I saw it in that way. I said, the Gulf of Mexico is kind of an America centric term, because it's like, oh yeah, that's the Gulf that's down by Mexico, like,
yeah,
because you're looking at it from an American perspective. But I don't have
yeah.
strong feelings. I,
Or
I would
one
say that.
more. I mean,
Go ahead.
it would have been a chance. It could have been a chance as well to find a historic figure to honor.
That's true too.
Gulf of, I don't know who, someone cool.
Yeah. The I will say that the planting the premise that you can like that renaming things is not just for the left. Like, I think restoring, did he? I don't think he's officially restored, like, the Confederate names and stuff yet.
Like Fort, what was it, Fort Bragg, or which one was that
There were
they
a
didn't want?
bunch: Fort Bragg, Fort AP Hill,
Yeah,
Fort Lee, um, or was Fort Lee older than Robert E. Lee? I can't remember, but anyway, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of different names that you could. I mean, you could restore those names, and although I don't know, was that an executive order? It must have been an executive order, not not legislation. But yeah, I mean, just planting the premise that, like, the symbols of America matter, and not just letting it again be a ratchet effect, right? Where when the left is in power, they burn all of our idols, and then when we're in power, we just leave it be, because, man, we don't want to be weird and try to bring back something.
yeah,
So
yeah. There's that strain of with conservatism, which is sort of the main strain, I guess, which is conservatism is to just not change things, and
right.
we'll let people change things, and we're not going to change them back, because that would
or,
be
or
not.
just, like,
Yeah,
and it's not even, and sometimes it's more it's not even about, like, a doctrinal adherence to conservatism. It's like just a personal aversion to rocking the boat. There's a certain
yeah, yeah,
personality type that's drawn to that. It's like, that would, changing back to McKinley. I mean, we've been saying Denali here for a few years. I mean, who really cares about William McKinley? And I think Trump's been saying McKinley longer than us. He's almost 80 years old. So I mean, to him, it probably feels like an affront to the old America in a sincere way. And so, and he mentioned, he's like, William McKinley is a great businessman, really
yeah.
wonderful businessman. He was a business focused president, and we're going to honor him. The great people of Ohio voted for him. And
It's the
so,
tariffs. It's He talks about McKinley in context of
oh, that's
tariffs.
true. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
people talk about Trump and Andrew Jackson, but he is he is a bit of a McKinley style conservative at the same time too. You
because
know.
he talks about, he's like, he went on Rogan. He was like, he made us very rich. He made us very, very rich. He brought it. He did tariffs. They made great sense. And this is one of those things. I know some economists, some professional economists who teach or work in high offices. Like, tariffs is like, that's the devil to them. Like, that is the
Yeah.
dumbest. They all hate it. But I have this sense that it's just sort of like, I think it's going to work. Like,
Oh
and it's
yeah.
not, and again, it's not, and maybe they are too nerdy to get this. But again, this is about negotiating. Like, not every tariff Trump talks about is ever going to actually be a real tariff, but it's about making China or whatever believe that it's going to be real.
Well, the funny thing is like everybody agrees that tariffs like work to some extent. I mean, it just depends on what the goal is. Like, in the 1990s, Clinton slapped like 100% tariff on Japanese luxury cars. You know,
Mm-hmm.
because the Japanese car industry was very protectionist. You couldn't sell American cars in Japan, and so the Clinton administration said, until you guys um, change this, people are going to pay double for a Lexus. And
Mm-hmm.
they got some changes. I don't know how much it actually helped American sales in Japan. I don't think Japanese people like American cars, the um, but the point is that like the idea that you can use it to wallop some that's just like old school politics. It took, I think, the takeover of like the Reaganite libertarian conservative. And I'm not, when I say Reaganite, I just mean out of that movement. I'm not saying Ronald Reagan felt this way, but like,
Yeah.
the Reaganite economist conservatives, they're just like doctrinarily, maybe Milton Friedman would be a better example. They just think because tariffs lead to, they don't make the big line go up as much, so
Yeah.
they're bad. But they're looking at, if you wanted to, um, within a system, say like the global economic system, within that system, if you want to make it as efficient as possible, you don't want barriers, right?
Mm.
But you know outside your system, you may want barriers, right? It's like you don't build walls, you don't build a border wall in your house or within your state. You build it on the border of the country, right? And like, so if you're looking for total global economic efficiency, yeah, trade barriers are bad. If you're looking for what's good for a particular country, it's very contextual. Does it make sense to have a trade barrier here or not? Because I mean, Bush had a steel tariff, or in the early 2000s, when there was a lot of cheap steel from Russia because of the fall of the Soviet Union. They were just kind of fire sailing all their steel, and we had a steel tariff, and the American automakers didn't like it because it's more expensive for them. The steel makers loved it. I mean, there's going to be displacements when Trump has tariffs too, but the question is like, what is good for the long term good of the country? And probably being a place that doesn't make anything but just consumes cheap crap from other countries is not optimal, for
Yeah.
the long term health of the body politic.
I should have made this joke like 4 minutes ago, but you know which Japanese people do like American cars? Well,
Oh,
it's not
please.
even a joke. It's not a joke. There's no punchline. But
I'm trying to think. I don't know.
do you know? Have you seen those Japanese cholos?
No.
They like American cars. There's like
Okay,
this group
I've seen Japanese rockabillys
and cowboy, yeah, Japanese cowboys and stuff.
and cowboys.
So there's these
Um,
Japanese people who dress as cholos and have like they do like the
the
bouncing
sh-
cars and stuff.
and the
So they
shoes that have, do they do like are they like cartel type Japanese people, like, or they're like Chicano American cholos, right? Like,
they're looking, yeah, they're trying to look like Mexicans, right? But they do, I mean, once they get all dressed up, they do basically look like Mexicans.
right.
And there's women that are into it as well and stuff. It's a whole scene. I don't know how big it is, but it's kind of cool. It's kind of funny at least.
That's
Um
funny. And they probably love all these old American cars, like,
yeah, it might be like
yeah.
Yakuza adjacent. I don't know, but it's a funny thing.
That is pretty fun. No, I've definitely seen like weird American subcultures be copied by Japan, but that's one I hadn't heard of.
Yeah, there's good videos that
Funny.
go around. You'll see that meme sort of thing. Okay, let's get to the. This is the last one I had in mind. I don't want to keep you
Okay,
too much longer,
sure.
and I hope you don't mind. I think I might put this part as a bonus section. I
Okay.
hope you don't mind me like attempting to profit off of your
I
time.
want you to grift off me as much as possible. So go ahead.
Okay, so people who are not paid, people who are not you're about to get cut off if you don't pay. Anyway, so the last one I wanted to talk about was the declassification of records concerning the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What are you anticipating here?
Well,
Full episode available on Substack.com. Thank you for listening to the Sigma stream of the Granite Mountain Movie Club.